This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Podcast, episode number 10.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. In today's episode, I interview Rob Bryce from Fish&nbsp on Instagram. Rob guides on the Skeena River basin and tributaries and has been catching and posting amazing pics for quite a while now on Instagram. Rob talks about how to find fish on the Morice River, the sinking line system he uses, and how to catch steelhead on dry flies during the wintertime. He shares a typical day on the Skeena, the Slick Shooter, and how to catch steelhead with a cigarette butt. Without further ado, here's Rob Bryce from Fish&nbsp. How's it going, Rob?
Not too bad. And you?
Good. Yeah, I'm glad we were able to put this together here. I've got some questions I want to dig into here. A lot of it's focused on the Skeena Basin. I've spent a little bit of time up there, and it's been actually quite a while. I think I'm at my 10-year reunion. We're talking about going back up, but I'd love to pick your brain. I think I first saw you on Instagram and some of the photos you were posting. So do you want to dig into it here a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I live actually in Terrace now. Probably for the last year and a half here, I've been residing here. But before that, I basically was out here. It seemed, I don't know, a few times a month with work and that. Every chance I had to get out here, I was out here fishing. And yeah, it is kind of just the mecca of steelhead and salmon fishing. You know, year round here. It doesn't matter what month it is, you can get out in the river and fish, whether it's one of the tribs or on the mainstem Skeena.
That's cool. See, that's the thing I wasn't really, when we were up there, I think we were into October, and then we started leaving. The thing was like, snow's coming, head out. But that was the other cool thing seeing your pics is that, I mean, I guess it does get a little cold up there, but you're fishing throughout the whole winter. Just kind of, it's a little chilly in the winter, but you're good to go still.
Yeah, it doesn't, I mean, here we get some cold spells, and you hang up your rod for a week, and then, usually another big Pacific system comes in, warms things up, and you're back out in the river again. And I mean, most of the rivers here do close December 31st, so there's a few months there where we're not fishing, but there still is a few that they keep open, and then starting kind of February, March, things start ramping up again. So you just got a short little lull there with some limited rivers that you can fish, and then after that, it's we're good to go in hundreds of Skeena River tribs.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. This is I've got a bunch of questions here. Hopefully we can get through most of them just on the Skeena and the system. We went up there, and I knew a little bit about it, but I was kind of just shooting blind a little bit on things. But maybe we could just get started with a little more of your background, kind of how you got into fly fishing and ultimately steelhead fishing, and how you managed to now post all those awesome pictures of the beautiful steelhead on Instagram.
Well, I started, I can't say that my father really got me into it. It was probably one of my friends' fathers when I was younger. We used to go out fishing on the Morice, one of the main steelhead tribs. So that's where we went out. The road was barely up the Morice Valley there, and we'd take an old pickup truck and a canoe with three of us in there, and we'd paddle down the Morice River back in probably 80 to 83 was when we really, first started doing that. And we were gear fishing. So I started out gear fishing, with my crocodile and coho spoons and that, and then after that we started coming out to Terrace and fishing the Kalem and the Kitimat, and fished those a ton. And after catching fish on spoons and that, you slowly kind of it's the challenge is kind of gone, I guess. Yep. And we started picking up some spay rods and figuring that out, and haven't looked back since. And so it's the Morice, I'd say, is the river I probably fished the most for steelhead, just from the past history there with my one friend and his father that got me into it. So and now I'm out here working in Terrace, and I started doing some guiding for a friend of mine here. I still have a full-time job, but did that throughout the summer, and always seem to have a steady stream of friends and that coming out as well, and taking them out fishing as well. So and then any chance I get, I'm pretty much out there fishing now. So awesome. Posting pics on Instagram, and like you said, doesn't matter. I almost prefer the how the months of November, December,
Yep.
there's no people
That's
out there.
right.
There's lots of fish in the rivers, and you got everything to yourself basically. You don't have to worry about and not that it's super crowded out here, but
Yeah.
it's I'd like to see nobody on the river when I'm fishing. So we usually go to those spots where you have it all to yourself.
This is cool. No, it's good to hear, because I think, when we went up there, we tried to fish as much as we could, and the Morice was actually one of the rivers it was great to fish. I think we brought a drift boat up the first year. We threw it in. We were just, it felt like we were in sections all to our own. And then you heard, the last 10 years that, you hear these stories, it's getting busy, it's crazy up there. But it sounds like there's still, it's not too big of a deal. You can still find some water to fish. And
the common, the mainstem Skeena, I'd say, isn't that busy. There's, hundreds and hundreds of gravel bars. But you get onto the Bulkley, the Morice, the Kispiox, and they're starting to get busier. And I usually don't fish them a lot right now. The Morice isn't as bad because you can go to some of the upper parts of it and get away from most of the people. But there's, you hear the stories and see the pictures now of the Bulkley during prime time, in late September, early October. There can, I don't know, probably 40, 50, 60 boats on some of the stretches there. And same with the Kispiox. There might be 30, 40 people on, one drift. So it's kind of just, but we have the benefit of living here. So we kind of got some, inside knowledge on some of the other systems, and we don't have to fish those systems during prime time. We can, be off doing other rivers. So
Sure. No, that's good. You mentioned the Morice. Is that maybe you could explain for somebody new to it, how you fish it and how you get into fish up there? Just maybe do a rundown on the whole thing as far as the gear and flies and things like that.
Yeah, well, I'm primarily, the Morice is known for, for its dry fly action, and we have a few runs we know that are, shallow, and the fish are there, and we know that those runs are holding fish. We'll bring out our dry flies and go through them first with that. Just kind of, I'm typically using little foam patterns and that because I hate when they get submerged and having to dry them out. So we're just out there, basically swinging dry flies out there in some of the pools. And then myself, I'm still a skagit guy. I got typically bigger flies, intruders, style flies, and swinging those. Usually for me on the Morice, it's not a big river up there, and 5 feet of T14 is probably my go-to sink tip for almost everything I do for steelhead. So it, unless I'm fishing some really big water and big tanky stuff, for the most part, 5 feet. And the smaller systems, 2.5 feet of T14. So that's what I'm using is those MOW tips most of the time for my fishing. And the Morice has, it's got so much water there. You can, when we go out, we're usually blasting up from Owen Flats, which is, I think, at 30 kilometer roughly, or 29 kilometer on the Morice Road. And you get a few less people up there, and we can run the jet boat up, 50 kilometers up to Gawesworth and fish all the way up there. And then when it opens up later, you can even go up further towards the lake. So there's plenty of water up there, and when you get to know the pools and the runs and that, you're just fishing the ones that are typically holding fish. And but for someone new, it's there's still lots of water. If you know how to read water, you're going to get into fish on the Morice. It's water's water for steelhead, but it's that difficult. But when you have that inside knowledge, you see some of the guides up there too, and they have their favorite runs that they're out there every day. So there's usually a few guide boats in that upper section as well. And they have a lodge. I'm not sure if they still use it, but there is a lodge up there on the Morice too. But I don't know if they actually stay overnight there. But typically 2 or 3 jet boats up there. And then you got the 30 kilometers kind of down from Owen Flats down to the basically the junction with the Bulkley. Yeah. And there's a drift there from Aspen down to Bimac. About 14 kilometer drift, and that's probably the most popular one. It goes from wreck site to wreck site or campground to campground, and I would say that's probably, if you're drifting in that, you don't see a lot of jet boats on that one. There's not really a launch at the upper end of it, so most guys are drifting that section. You won't start seeing jet boats till the bottom 4 or 5K of that drift. And then lots of walk-in spots. We'll fish it right up till December 31st, and by then it's there can be 2-3 feet of snow on the ground up there, so we're just walking into spots we know that are holding fish, and then we walk in. Usually I have taken a little raft with a jet on it, throwing it down the snowbank and away we go with a little 25 jet up there. But for the most part, in the winter time, we only seem to be fishing 3 or 4 runs and fishing them hard. So but no, it's a nice river, and like I said, they're small fish though. The Morice is, if you're in there looking for some big fish, the Morice is predominantly 1-year ocean fish. So, they're that 5 to 8 pounds is pretty much the norm. If you get a 15-pounder, you've got a big fish, Morice, and even 10 pounds is a pretty good size fish for there.
Cool.
So they're all smaller, but they're aggressive. And the Morice does have the largest component of Skeena River steelhead. So as far as the numbers go, it's usually 25% of the entire Skeena run is in the Morice.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's a big producer. It's got the lake up there, which is Morice Lake, a massive lake up in the headwaters there, and that typically buffers it from any large rain events and that. And the further up you go, the clearer it'll be. It'll be high, but it's usually still fishable. The higher up you go up the Morice, and the further down you go, closer to the Bulkley, it can get blown out. And then it does take a while though to clean up. Though it's one of those systems that it'll blow out. It'll take a while to blow out, but when it does, then it'll take a while to get back in shape again.
Mm-hmm. No, that's cool. Yeah, so you're fishing. So you mentioned reading water. I mean, I remember when we jumped in the Morice, that is always the challenge. You have all this water. It all looks good. It's like, I can fish everything. That's kind of what we did. And, you end up probably fishing some water that's not the best. But do you have any tips on, as far as reading water, when you come down, you look and it just looks like all one big run. Do you kind of go start at the head or the tail, or how do you do it? Or how would you recommend a new person to the Morice do it?
Oh, I mean, typically I would just, if you just stick to the walking speed water with a nice little seam there, that's going to kind of be your money, your typical water. But the Morice does have, I don't know, the one thing I've learned about that, when the water gets high, it has all kinds of little, little slots or, back channels and that. And on those seams of those back channels, we seem to catch a lot of fish.
Oh, yeah.
They're just kind of hanging out in that little bit of slack water between a little side channel. And typically just when it gets, the water gets high, and, they're not sitting out in the big long runs anymore when the velocity's picked up. And we've learned that over the years, that fishing those little seams between a little side channel that veers off, and it could be stagnant in there. And even in those, there's it's not, you're not swinging necessarily as much, or it's a very slow swing, but they're sitting in some of those those slow stagnant water sometimes, even in the Morice. I've noticed that these little back channels, and they're sitting in there and I'm not sure, sometimes maybe they're in there with the coho. They get a decent run of coho going up the Morice, and steelhead do like to eat coho eggs, and the coho love that slack water. You'll see them in there splashing and jumping, and I've seen so many times now when you catch a steelhead and it's got eggs it's puking out of its mouth. So
that's cool.
I think that my thing is they could be sitting in there going after the coho eggs, but it is daunting, these big long runs. And if we get out there with jet boat and we got 3 of us in there, we can spread out and cover the water pretty good. And the tailouts, I love the tailouts. I love it nice and shallow, and if you're gonna skate a dry fly through there, it's shallow enough for them to get a really good look at it. So if I have a choice, I'd always pick the tailout for me, and we've had some amazing days in some of those tailouts where they're and you float by afterwards in your raft or in the jet boat, just turn it off and float by, and you can see them all scattered in the tailout. So, but with that said, we catch them everywhere. Up at the head, and right in the big tank sometimes, in the meat of it, and usually there, some of my buddies will be using heavier sink tips, and that will usually be a benefit in some of the tanks or the run and that, where they're getting down deep. But they are, if you're there in September, October, they're aggressive fish. You don't have to be using anything too heavy to get down to them. They'll chase stuff, and you see them chasing it sometimes across the pool. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah. So you're not really using super heavy fly. You've got the sink tip on. Or are you just using your typical intruder style, or with some bead eyes, that sort of thing?
beadhead or something on there. I mean, I typically like my fly and my tip to sink at the same speed. So that's just my personal preference, is having a little bit of weight on my fly so that it's sinking at the same rate as, and I don't have to mend so much to get that fly down. So I'd rather just, cast out in one simple mend and let it swing kind of thing. And, it's, if I really want to get it down deep, you can get it up high and, straight across and mend and let that thing drop. We'll do that sometimes to get down into the deep tanks, but I love just, casting her out there, let it swing. And I think, if it's got some weight on that fly, it's going to go down at the same speed as the sink tip. And I mean, my personal preference, I love red flies, anything with red on them.
Nice.
That's just my personal preference. I know I've got, blues and blacks and purples, greens, whatever. But, what they say, it's, wherever you feel confident in. And, and I don't know. I just think the red stands out.
Do you fish the red in the both kind of cloudier conditions and clear, or do you find it works better with the clear?
I don't know. I usually just fish it, in everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. I'm, oranges and reds and that, it does stick out when it does get, a little bit murky in there too. That's what I find. But I'm usually just, and sometimes we'll put on some real small kind of hobo style things where there's not a whole lot of meat to them. But I don't know. Usually we're just, we got a little fly and cast her out, let her swing, and we can go all day with. I'm not one of these guys who switches up continually, pool after pool, and I'm not getting anything. I think if they're in there, they're going to take your fly, and it doesn't matter what, there's stories of guys hooking up a cigarette butt and casting it out and catching steelhead. That I think as long as that thing's, swinging or moving, it, they're going to chase it down. So I think the color and style and all that isn't as important, even though people put so much time and effort into,
I know,
the look of their flies, which is great. They have pride and passion in them. But I mean, my personal opinion is they're not that fussy. It's usually whoever goes through there first or has the best presentation that ends up getting them.
No, that's a great point, especially for somebody new to this, realizing it's like, just pick a fly and fish it. The fact that, color, is important, but it's not critical. It's more getting to the fish. So no, that's a good point for sure. So are you using just a tip, like a 13-foot rod with like 8 weight, or what sort of?
Usually I got an 8 weight, 7-8 weight, 13.5. I got all mine are pretty much G Loomis rods, skagit rods. I do have, I got a couple switch rods as well that now, and a lot of these smaller systems I fish, strictly a 7 or 8 weight switch rod. Cool. It feels a lot better.
So is
and
that
you don't
like
have to,
what's the length?
11 feet.
Oh, yeah.
So, 11-foot switch rod. And you can still bomb it out there quite a ways, even, with the intruder style. And, I'm never chucking more than usually 2.5 or 5 feet of T14. So, you're not chucking real heavy lines on it. But so even on the Morice now, I'd still probably, almost go more to that. Doesn't, unless we're on some big runs where you really got to get it out to the far side. But, I just normally, a 13.5 foot, and I'm using this, compact skagit, and then I'm always using the Rio Slick Shooter. That's what I use for my running line.
Okay.
I think it just casts better, and it's cheap. $10 for for that 50-pound a roll of that, and it's thin diameter, and I mean, when it's cold out, it's sometimes a little tough to handle, but it sure casts far, and doesn't take up a lot of space on your reel. You can really load it up. So that's what I'm using right now. And all mine is just the 50-pound Rio Slick Shooter for running line. And,
cool.
And I know, but it's personal preference. Guys have their preferences on what they like to use, and that's fine. But that's what's worked for me.
Yeah, nice. No, that's great. So some more good tips there. What's maybe you can clarify the whole, throughout the season. You have the fall fishery and into the kind of the winter, spring. Can you do a little rundown on, where the fish are at, or, where might be good places to fish? Because we really focused on the fall, but there's a whole nother end that's kind of in that other end of the season.
That's the beauty of the whole Skeena system and the whole North Coast here is there's 2 runs of fish. We, what people call summer run fish, which start coming into the system late June, but primarily the end of July was when the big push starts, and they'll come in right until September. And then they start making their way into their Skeena River tribs, or even the mainstem Skeena if they're spawning their home river, some little creek that's not big enough to overwinter, and they'll be up just in the mainstem Skeena and the big canyons and tanks and that, just overwintering in there. If they're in one of the bigger systems, they'll go into some of the bigger holes and tanks and that, and overwinter in the deep pools. So that's the summer run fish that kind of gets the most attention, and that makes up about 80% of the run on the Skeena. And as a general kind of rule of thumb, anything above terrace on the Skeena, so about 150 kilometers from the ocean, depending on where you kind of say the ocean is. So anything above terrace would be summer run fish.
Oh, okay.
Anything below terrace would be spring or winter run fish.
Gotcha.
And anything right in around terrace. So we have the Copper River here, the Kalem River, the Lake Else, Zimacord. So there's 3 or 4 rivers right in around terrace within about 10 kilometers, and they all have both. So they have summer run fish that have already come in, and usually go up into the further reaches, and then over the winter, and then more so in March and April, the spring run will come in, and those will typically be in the lower ends of the Copper, the lower ends of the Kalem and Lake Else, and that they'll start to come in the winter or spring. So some people call them winter fish, some spring fish, but I think the big push for the spring fish is usually March and April, when they start coming in, and that fishery is really, really getting popular now. I remember coming here when 20 years ago, and you'd barely see anyone out in the Skeena or anywhere fishing those spring run fish, and I don't even think most people realized that there was steelhead coming up the Skeena in March and April, and they started fishing in mid-April to late April for them, and then now you got guides and people out there in March fishing for these fish coming up, and it is a small run, and they're primarily, like I said, going into the tribs below terrace, so the few around here in terrace, and then the tribs all the way down to the ocean. You got the Gitnadoiks and Cassicks and Xjamsiks and all these little creeks in that have not huge runs of steelhead. They're primarily, I would say, the rivers that we have below terrace are primarily coho rivers, and really good coho rivers, but they will have steelhead in them as well. So, and then the beauty of not really Skeena related, but the spring fisheries, any creek out there on the north coast, that's kind of small in size, will have some spring fish in it. And that's kind of my favorite thing, is you can go on a map or Google Earth and pick out a creek, and you can be guaranteed it will have steelhead in it. It may only have 5-10 fish. It may have 100 fish. Who knows how many are in there and what kind of habitat it has. But it'll have fish. And, if you're into bushwhacking and that, and hiking up these things, and I don't know, there's nothing like going into a little creek with this fish that's just come in, and they come in pretty quick. They're in and out. Lots of them are coming in late April, and then they spawn and they're right back out again. So those are kind of 2 fisheries that we have here. The summer runs, which are far more aggressive, dry flies and they chase stuff down. The spring fish are nowhere near as aggressive. The water's colder, and they typically come in and then rip right back out again. Yeah. So those are the 2 the 2 fisheries that we here.
Yeah. So that makes sense. It's so that's why the summer fishery is not only is more popular, but there's a lot more fish out there. And so if you had to say, somebody was going to come up there, they had a couple weeks, what would be a good? Would you recommend for a good time to go up there if they just had 2 weeks to hit it?
I mean, it's tough to it. What do you want to do if you want to? If you like catching fish on big water and big river. I mean, the mainstem Skeena in August is, if it's in half decent shape, there's nothing like catching, 15, 20 pound steelhead on that big water out there swinging and watching that fish come up. And I don't know, that gets some people's juices going, and big, long gravel bars, and, you're only fishing maybe 3 of them a day kind of thing from top to bottom. And you're fishing for migrating fish that are on the move. They're not, in the pools waiting there. So it's, but you may be getting 1-2 a day. That might be your, I tell people not to get their hopes up, because most people I know that come up here usually don't catch anything, especially in the spring fishery. They come up and, it's getting hammered pretty good now in the spring, and they're just going to the spots where everyone else is going, and those fish have been worked over pretty good.
Sure.
So it's tough. But for 2 weeks, if that's the kind of water you like, if you want dry fly action, then September, September 15th to the 30th is probably the time to come, and that's when the fish are just getting into the different tribs. And you'd go for even early October as well for dry fly. I mean, you can catch them on. We've caught dry flies right into December, even when there's ice chunks coming down the river. So in some of the systems, they're still pretty aggressive, and they'll take anything on the surface.
Yeah,
and then if you're just more into numbers and less people, you want nobody around, November is a good month. Some fish are still trickling in, but I would say most of them are, in the system now. And one of the guys who taught me was just saying, for pure numbers, if you're fishing, in August and September or early September, there might only be, 20% of the fish in the system or 10% of the fish in the system. By the end of the month of September, there's, 40 or 50. By the end of November, you're up into that 80, 90% of the fish that are in the system. So there's more fish congregated in those tribs in November than, earlier on in September. They're still migrating up the Skeena and up the rivers, and they're not resting a whole lot. So I would say that and then if you're into adventure, the spring fishery, if you're into bushwhacking and not big numbers, but you want to fish in some beautiful little systems and that with guaranteed almost nobody there, then I would say the spring is probably your best bet. So I think it just depends on what kind of fishing you want to do for steelhead, and it's hard to say. I mean, right now for me, I think I find the spring fishery for me is almost, I don't know, one of my funnest times and best times, even though we don't catch a lot of fish, but we just get in the jet boat out in the ocean and just start looking for little creeks and tribs and start walking and cool. See what happens.
Yeah. I was thinking back, you mentioned the swinging dry flies. I saw a video you had out there. I think it was with Captain Quinn. Where you guys picked up, I think it was in November, you're picking them up on dries, and the water was pretty cool. But so you guys you're able to do that throughout to the end of the year. Or, I mean, I guess you're not going to get as many fish as earlier, but that's pretty good.
Yeah, if we know some of the runs where they're in there that late November, even December, like I said, we get them on the dry. They're pretty active still, and so you can. It's a. And then if you want to, they're even more aggressive in October and September. So if that's your ultimate goal is to get one on the dry fly, I would think you'd have pretty good luck if that's all you did and just work that dry fly.
What pattern do you use? You said the foam fly. Do you have a name for one of those patterns?
I don't even know what the.
I know the one. I know the one I've seen the one. Some of your photos. It's just your typical kind of got the foam front. I mean, it's mostly foam, pretty much. You got a little hackle on it.
Yeah, not much. Just creates a bit of profile, and they can be big too. Those fish are, they're, if we're ever using a float or something with a, little indicator or egg pattern or something on a little thingamabobber, they'll come up and take those sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, see them. No kidding.
So they're pretty aggressive, and I mean, I just like the foam. Just because, like I said, I hate it when it starts sinking and you're putting floatant on there and it's going subsurface, and this way it's really stays high on the surface and creates that nice V. And if we're trying to video it as well, you can really see it quite well in the with the camera. Where some of the other ones, the smaller ones, seem to start sinking down below the surface, and it's hard to follow them with a camera too. So we always figure the bigger the better, and they don't seem to the fish aren't too worried about how big they are.
I'll post a link in the show notes of some of the maybe a pattern of one of the ones. I know I could probably get a shot. Maybe I'll grab one from you. But if they just go to, you could probably just type in, I think, Rob Bryce, and I'm not sure what episode this is going to be, but go to wetflyswing.com and search for Rob Bryce, and then your show will come up for this episode, and then I'll have some links there to some of these flies, or at least one of the foam flies. That's cool. I think that's like the ultimate thing. I mean, if you can get them on the surface, and some of these times, I mean, you're getting into some monster fish. So that is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Do you have any, as far as a few steelhead tips? I always like to kind of pick the brain of my guests to see, a tip or two for just kind of general steelhead to help somebody if they're fishing the Skeena system to get into maybe their first fish.
Oh, I mean, it's complicated. That's one thing that some people are pretty coy on where they're, where to fish and that, and some of the regulations are pretty, ambiguous in where to go. And I don't know if you had any kind of local knowledge or someone that can, not even telling you your hot spot, but that's always if they just want to get a fish. And the Skeena in some senses is, in August is, it doesn't matter where you go, as long as you kind of got that nice kind of walking speed, not super fast, and a little bit of a seam where, those fish are coming up and migrating up, and you don't have to worry about it being fished over because those fish are all on the move. So that's, if they want to get one on the Skeena, you're not having to get up at 5 a.m. to go stake out a spot somewhere or get ahead of other people, because it is tough. If you've never fished here before and you're trying to find a nice spot to go fish, it's, and having a boat or a raft, I'd say is, you're going to eliminate, another 50% of the people who don't have a boat or a raft. So if you have access to some sort of raft or something, and you can ask around where some of the popular floats are, on the Skeena systems and that, but they do get popular, as I mentioned, the Bulkley, the Morice, and Kispiox, and they all have floats that you can do. The Kalem, you can float that there, but it's so is everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. How about the Babine? I know that's more of a fly-in sort of deal, but do you have? Is there any chance for anybody to get in and drop into places to fish that river?
That one is pretty limited. I've been up there a few times, and to be honest, it's not my favorite as far as it's pretty. There's a boat launch up there. It's about an hour and a half drive north of Smithers, up on a dirt road, and there's a bridge that crosses, and guys catch fish right there at the bridge. There always seems to be someone there, but people, I talk to people who go up there and they seem to have not bad luck. And then you can walk down a little ways. It gets pretty, brushy and gnarly in that
lots
walking down, and lots of bears. Yeah, they seem to leave you alone. But I've been up there and taken a jet boat down a few times, and there's a couple guiding operations there, and nothing against the guides, they're all just trying to make a buck and that, but you run into them pretty quick. Within about a kilometer of the boat launch, you start running into them and their clients, and it seems all the prime holes are taken with clients, and they're they're shuttling them around from hole to hole or run to run, and so it's we're hopscotching all day long. And you would think, for being up in the middle of nowhere, basically, it you'd have access to some water that hasn't been fished over, but they're big fish, and you'll get something there. It's if you're up there, but the river is pretty bouldery and nuggety, and you really have to know what you're doing to make sure your boat's running well, because you're going downriver, and that has some some big rapids and that, so you better have a boat that you know how to run and that's in good shape.
We the first year we were up there, we kind of hit the Morice and fished a lot of that, kind of car camped it. But the second year we did like a 10-day. We set up this 10-day trip into the Babine, and we had like 2 rafts, and we floated all the way down into through the canyon into the Skeena eventually, and down, and it was like, I know it was pretty intense, because there's some areas in there that are pretty technical, and I think we lucked out a little bit because the water was lower, and some of those areas were probably not as bad as they could have been. But we kind of went for it, and definitely, you're right though, we had areas where there were some jet sleds and we couldn't fish, but eventually, once we got down below where they couldn't go, we had some good water. But no, that's cool.
How'd you do up there on the Babine? Was it pretty good? Or
yeah, I mean, we it was the whole trip, both years, we were out there on our own, just kind of exploring, and so. But yeah, I mean, I caught the biggest fish of my life. I think I caught 2 or 3 of the biggest fish of my life on the Babine. Yeah. And it was amazing. I mean, it was just, it was cold and just a great trip all around. But we also got some fish on the Morice as well, some really nice fish. The one river we didn't do well on, in fact, the river we got skunked, was the Kispiox. Yeah. And, that's definitely a clear river, but I'm not sure. I guess they all fish. Do you find that you kind of fish all the rivers a little bit differently, or are you kind of doing the same thing?
Kind of the same thing. I mean, the Kispiox, I fish that a lot too, and it gets so busy now too. It's the lower end where a lot of the earlier fish are hanging out. It gets pretty busy. The local First Nations there have a fee now too for launching rafts and fishing in there. which you thought might thin it out a bit, but not really. And now we have this, quality water strategy that, for non-residents, basically they can just fish midweek. And that, in talking to some of the conservation officers, I think the float we did there one time, there was a conservation officer out there, and he said that there was about, 30 people on the day we were there on a weekend, and then that bumps up to 60 to 80 people on that one stretch on the midweek. So a lot more non-residents fishing it. So it gets pretty busy, and I go fish that later on in November when it gets colder and people have left. I don't mind fishing in the cold and that, and just kind of thins a lot of the people out. But yeah, beautiful river, and big fish in there too. Lots of the the 2 and 3 year old ocean fish in the Kispiox, and used to have really good numbers. I think they've probably gone down a bit now. But just gorgeous. In the fall with all the the fall colors and that. The trees, and it's just beautiful. And I mean, one of the things though I find there, and a lot of our systems, is the fishing on windy days in October, and that the leaves that come down. I've had some days on the Kispiox. You couldn't even really swing a fly in there. There were so many leaves in the water column that just sensory overload, I'm sure, for any steelhead in there. That so I notice that on the Kispiox when we go fish it, if there's a big wind event, we're not typically heading out there. But yeah, beautiful river, and you got a chance of catching a big fish in there, and and the Babine too has got some of the biggest steelhead as well. So, but yeah, I guess you're pretty lucky going down doing a float like that. I've never done that before, but heard a couple canyons in there, and lots of bears and that.
It was kind of funny because like you said, the tip you gave before was great. Talk to somebody local, and we had two people. There was one guy, Big Red, who's he's a guy up there somewhere, and I was chatting with him, and he was helping us with. We used a lot of his patterns, but there was this other guy, and I can't remember his name exactly, but he was kind of a local. He had some connection to the helicopters or something, but we basically had an EPIRB on board, so push the button and they would come in and get us if something crazy happened. So we had it set up, but it was funny because he made us these hand sketched maps, and one of them was like the boulder garden. This is a boulder garden, and we got into it, expecting just a little boulder garden. It was like a class 3 technical, serious. And then there's other ones down below, like stay right or die, and these sorts of things. So it was kind of funny, but it was definitely. I mean, I've done some good whitewater. I've been in some pretty decent stuff. But you definitely don't want to go down there unless you're very experienced behind the oars, because there's one spot where our boat barely was wide enough to get through the canyon wall. I mean, that's how tight it narrows up, and but it was fun. We couldn't, and that's the thing, as we're thinking about going back up there, we're kind of trying to figure out whether we want to do that again, and we'll see how it works out. But yeah, it's just beautiful.
A true adventure.
Yeah, it was. For sure. It was awesome. So. I got so many questions here. I could just keep talking, but maybe you could share I always like to kind of talk about a memorable steelhead moment. Do you have one that sticks out as far as, I don't know, whether it's a big fish or numbers of fish? Do you find that's, what is a good day? And also, I guess the second part of that, what is a good day fishing in the Skeena system for you?
Oh, a good day for me. It's not numbers. It's basically just fishing. With to me, not a lot of people around, and fishing with good company, friends, and that. And obviously getting a fish is nice to have as well. But for me now, I think maybe when I was younger, it was probably more about the numbers, and we wouldn't get off the river until it was dark, and we'd be. We wouldn't take lunch breaks or anything. We're basically just flogging it as hard as we could all day, and. I think this is probably common with a lot of people as you get older, in that you take the time. We build campfires now and hang out and have a beer, and just take it easy and enjoy the surroundings. And so for me, I'd say that's probably more important, is just fishing in a nice place that with the mountains around you and not a lot of people around. I'd rather just take a break and not have to worry about some guys coming in below you or above you or whatever, and that I'd rather just, I'm with my buddies here. They can, there'll be 2 or 3 of us fishing a run. I just hope someone gets a fish. That's, But I would say that's for me. And that's why I like the spring fishery, because we know we're going to some of these systems where we know they have fish, and we hike up, and you're just fishing, and you're the only one on this little system, and probably the only person who's fished it this year as well. Wow. So it's just nice to know that, you got fish that haven't been targeted at all. So I don't know. As far as my most memorable, to be honest, I've caught a lot of steelhead, but I haven't caught a lot of big fish.
Yeah.
I've caught some, in the 20, 21 pounds, but
wow.
Even that, not a lot of those. I mean, fishing the Morice lots and some of the other systems just haven't.
What is maybe for those that don't know, what is a big fish? I mean, I know there's been world records caught on the Kispiox. What is a big fish for the Skeena?
I would say now, if you're 20 pounds, it'd be a good fish on the Skeena or one of the tribs, and those are typically going to some of the tribs where they have those 2 and 3 and 4 year ocean fish. So that's one of the unique things about the Skeena system is just how variable it is with the different combinations of the steelhead life cycle. So you can have steelhead that spend anywhere from they say 1 to 5 years in the river after they've they've hatched from their eggs as a fry, and then as smolts they come out to the ocean. And then they can spend anywhere from 1 to 4 years, maybe 5 as a feeding in the ocean and come back. And the biggest fish that we have here on the Skeena are those ones that typically 3 years, maybe 4 year ocean fish. So those would be the 20 plus, 25 pound. I'm sure there's 30 pounds. I'm sure in some of the commercial nets they've caught ones. I'm sure you've seen photos of them, and that's these 30 pounders that are out there. Yep. So but rivers like the Babine are typically they'll have 3 year ocean fish is kind of the norm there. Same thing with the Kispiox, the Sustat. They all have those 2 and 3, maybe the occasional 4 year ocean fish. That's a good thing too, just the diversity in that. If something happens in that system, not all the fish are coming back in that 1 year. They're not all 2 year fish. Every system, well, even the Morice, which is primarily 1 year ocean fish, will still have some 2s and maybe the occasional 3, but it's predominantly 1 year ocean fish. So going into these systems that if you're familiar with them, what kind of what their life stage is, and how many are the 2 or the 3 year or 4 year ocean fish. And people who want to catch a big fish, then those are the systems that they typically target. So and then they could be anywhere from like I said 1 to 5 years in the rivers. And steelhead need typically warmer water and that to grow, and the rivers up here really are unproductive compared to the ones down in the in the States, and that the Columbia might have 1 and 2 year, I would say, is the predominant number of years for a steelhead to grow in the systems there, whereas up here 3 would probably to 5 would be more common. So they spend a lot of time in the river system before they're ready to go as a smolt and survive in the ocean. And the further north they are, typically the longer they're going to spend in the river. So rivers like the Sustat, they're up there 560 kilometers or 550 kilometers up the Skeena. Super high elevation, 1,500 meters that these fish have swam. The summers are short. They hatch, maybe in, steelhead hatch in 20 to 80 days, the eggs. And, you might be 20 days, 30 days down in the Columbia system. But up here, you're the Sustat, you're probably close to that 80-day window just because of the water temperature. So our rivers, everyone says, oh, you got, amazing steelhead and lots of them. But they really are unproductive with cold summers, cold winters, and they just don't grow that fast. So they're typically taking 3 to 5 years to basically get big enough and strong enough to survive in the ocean. So
right,
it's but every system, if you're familiar, every system here has their kind of pattern of what they predominantly are. If they're 1, 2, 3 year, 4 year ocean fish, and the one beautiful thing about steelhead too is that they don't necessarily die after spawning. And you would think that a fish that spawned, there's cases of fish that have spawned 3 times, maybe even 4 times. Well, those aren't even the biggest fish. You would think, wow, that fish spawned 3 times. It should be massive because it's come into the river, gone back out to the ocean again. But typically, a fish that spent a good 3 years or 4 years in the ocean that never spawned is going to be far bigger than a 10-year-old steelhead that maybe came back after 2 years and then went back to the ocean and back and forth. They have cases of fish they know that were 3 years that they've caught 3 times up in the Babine, and that fish wasn't even that big. It was just it spent so much time in not feeding really in an unproductive river that it wasn't that big. But it is small. The percentage of fish that repeat spawn are I'd say about 10% up here in the Skeena system. So it's really not a lot of fish, and it's probably in the 15% for females, 5% for males who typically will stick around a lot longer in the system, try and guard the reds, and then they'll be fighting with other males. They'll try and actually spawn with multiple females, and then they'll head back out as a Celt, and even just spending that extra 3 weeks or 2 weeks in the river can sometimes be detrimental. They're caught in the commercial nets going back out in June. So whereas the females typically spawn and then they go right away to the ocean, so they're a bit higher percentage of repeat spawners. And then I'm not sure what the numbers are in the Columbia, but and the systems down there in Washington and Oregon, but they would be considerably higher, the number of repeat spawners. But even, the one thing that I'm not even sure what the answer to this is, but, we have these spring systems. I said that the steelhead come in, they may only come in a kilometer or a mile, and then they basically spawn, they head back out. There's no commercial fishery on them. There's no nets. There's no nothing. And I always wonder why those rivers aren't just jam-packed with steelhead, that they basically have nothing there, really. There's no nets or commercial boats out in the ocean at that time of the year.
Do you have a mentor or two, or you mentioned somebody earlier that somebody that's helped you along the way to get you to where you're catching so many of these nice fish? Do you want to throw out a couple of names of people that helped you along the way?
Well, I have a couple guys that actually, to be honest, have been just immensely helpful. One of them, his name is Mike Welpley. He's actually passed away now, and I would guess that he had been on every system out here in the Skeena and in the North Coast. I could sit there with him on Google Earth or some maps, and he could tell me about the fish in every single system. I wish I'd recorded him. Some of the stuff stuck with me, but he worked as he loved to fish. He had his own jet boats. He worked for our fisheries department up here as a contractor for years, and he had so much local knowledge, and he was actually just shared it so freely with me that it was just amazing that, he could just point on a map out there and say, yeah, this creek here has this. This is when you fish it. This is where we catch them. And my learning curve went from 0 to 100 just instantly with that kind of information. And then I got another friend here, a guy named Fred Seiler, who I work with doing some jet boat tours and other things. He used to be a fishing guide, and same thing when he was younger, an avid fisherman up and down every single river out here. And same thing, he pretty much can tell me about, if I ask him about any system out there, he can provide, can you run it with a jet boat, can't you? Where would you fish? Time would you go there? It's just that kind of knowledge is so tough to get from, so many people here are pretty tight-lipped about sharing these little systems and the information, and rightly so. I don't I'll take friends of mine there, but they're to some of these places, but some of the places I just I know I want to go there and fish, and I don't want to see 20 guys there the next time I go. So I'd say those two guys have been so helpful with me, and not as much maybe the patterns and the fly fishing techniques and that, but just on the geographical knowledge in this area, which is one of the key things. It's so vast, and there's so many systems and tributaries, and some of the stuff that just it kind of blows my mind sometimes. The stuff they tell me that where we think steelhead or salmon should be in systems at this time, and this is when the coho or the chinook or the steelhead come up, and this is when they should be there, but there's so many cases where that's not true. That these fish kind of have lives of their own, and for some strange reason, they show up really early or really late, and they show up in weird places, and it's just basically they've been out so many times fishing these that they've discovered those things. Yeah, no, it's cool. I think that's one of the cool things about steelhead is they do have so many different life histories. There's a lot of diversity there, so it's not like you can just put them into one little box. No, that's interesting. I was thinking when you were mentioning, I was thinking about just the resource. You know, I guess calling a local person is a real good idea. Is there a resource, that talks about the different life histories of, like where and when to fish? I know Simon Gawesworth was on actually episode number 9, and he is basically talking about how in the UK they have a website that has a link for like when to fish it, all the beats and things like that. I know obviously it's different up in BC, but do you know of anything like that? Oh, not really as far as, where and when. I mean, there's a guy named Noel Gyger up here. He has a website that he posts, I think, fishing reports every week. And, he's not going into the real secret spots, but he'll be, the Kitimat, is fishing well this week. The coho have arrived, or here's some guys with some early Chinook, so they're in there. And so, I mean, the Kitimat's one of the most popular rivers around. It has a hatchery on it, which is one of the only hatcheries we have up here in this area. And he, so there's lots of reports from there, and it's nothing that's too secret. But, the one thing that I look at a lot, if you just want to fish the Skeena mainstem for steelhead or salmon, is the test fishery. They have a website here where they actually go every day in the summer from late June till sometimes September, and they catch they set a gill net out for an hour at every slack tide. So usually 3 times a day for 1 hour. They catch the fish in there, salmon, steelhead, and then they post on the website how many fish they caught.
Oh, wow.
And they're calibrated. So I think steelhead, every steelhead they catch in that net equates to about 245 steelhead that would have swam by that day. So that's kind of the estimate. It's just an estimate, but we do the same thing for sockeye and Chinook and pinks and whatever. If that's your target that day, and you see that there was a big push of steelhead or a big push of Chinook or coho, then you can kind of get an idea when that push will be coming through terrace, or maybe you drive down the Skeena to somewhere and knowing that they had big numbers of steelhead 3 days ago, so you kind of they're swimming 10 to 15 kilometers a day, whereabouts is that going to put them on the Skeena to target them. So that's a resource I use a lot is if you see that there's, maybe there was a big commercial opening, which, we don't get a lot of now, but sometimes once a week during the sockeye season, then there's going to be a bit of a lull there for a day or so on for all the species, salmon and steelhead. So you kind of figure out, where would be a good spot to fish, based on that, go up above terrace or below, so you're not getting impacted by that commercial opening. So, but that's a good resource, is that the Tyee test fishery page, and updates every day. So it's cool. It's a resource. And then, like I said, the fishing reports, the tackle stores are good. We got a few tackle stores here, and the guys there are pretty good, pretty knowledgeable, and they're not going to give away the secrets, but they'll at least tell you that fish are being caught, they're in the system, or what it's like on the most popular areas. Another fishing tackle store in Kitimat as well, so they'll be giving out reports there. So it's those are some of the things. And then some guys are, if you take them out for a beer maybe or something, maybe they'll give you a bit more information. When you're up here, and you can befriend some of the guys out there on the river, and some of them will share some knowledge and that. I'm always freely sharing knowledge on the Skeena and that, just because it's it's a big river. The fish are migrating, and where to go fish and when and that kind of thing. But it's it's tough sometimes. No, that's cool. I was gonna note again that the link to the fishery, I'll definitely put that in the show notes. And I think I was looking here on my computer, I think I'm gonna have I think if folks just they can search Rob Bryce episode 10. I think even if Google search that'll pop up this episode, then they can go into the show notes to take a look here. Cool. So we're getting pretty close here. I got a couple more big questions I want to get to, and then we'll kind of move along. Well, I guess here's a simple one maybe. As far as flies, we talked a little bit about some of the dry flies. Do you have a couple of patterns you like to use of, just your typical swinging patterns? For dry flies?
No, just your typical.
For any fly?
Yeah, just any fly. What's the common thing you like to use?
I don't even know. To be honest, because I try and tie most of my own. I don't even know what I call them, and I pretty much use them extensively. I mean, I call them, the big red or, orange crush. I just make up these kind of stupid names, but they're basically all intruder flies, with a little, a little bit of weight on them and a little bit of, flash on them as well. So a little bit of, tinsel in there, marabou. I mean, they're nothing fancy. They don't look like a work of art, but when you see them in the water, they actually they look good. Tube flies. I got a little tube fly kit, and I love tying tube flies as well. Okay. But to be honest, I would say for myself, I am not a huge fly tyer and getting into, more just tie my, 3 or 4 patterns, and that seems to work for me for everything. And like I said, I don't switch them up all the time and change them. So yeah, I don't even, to be honest, I don't even know what I call these things that
like you said, the red, the color is probably more important than any of the names.
You can go into any store here or tie any intruder style, and if it's just steelhead, you don't want them too big. Unless the water's really dirty or murky, you're going to want a bigger profile, and you might want to extend them a bit longer. But
are you tying them pretty sparsely? I know there's some intruders, if you got a 3-inch intruder or something like that, you could tie it pretty heavily dressed. How do you do them?
I would say pretty medium. I don't like it so it's like this big chicken going out there, and I like the sink as well. So the more marabou in that seems to, I find, just holds it up in the water. So I wouldn't say it's, but I definitely like the wave action, some of the ostrich hurl and that on there. And I don't know, I just experiment a little bit, but to be honest, they all kind of look the same when they get in the water. And I think they all look good. That they look way better when they're in the water, and you see that, that big red thing, swinging across the, or I'll tie some small ones sometimes. And, when it's really these real tiny systems and that, where they might be a little bit spooky. But, to be honest, I don't get, fly tying is probably not my, I don't spend hours and hours. I just tie enough to keep me going and do my patterns, and then spend more of my time researching where to go and logistics and stuff like that, as opposed to and same thing with the rods and the setups, and I don't get too hung up on all that stuff either. Yeah. And I got my setups; they work fine, and I don't have I got lots of tips, but it seems I'm always using the same tip, every day that I go out. So
exactly,
not like having 3 or 4 rods all set up and a whole myriad of systems in that.
Right.
Just keep it.
That's more simple. Exactly. That's more for the fly fishing industry, right? They always have. There's always, like Simon said, I think in the last one, there's always a new. Every year there's a new thing coming out, so that's part of the deal. Yeah. Cool.
And everyone tries to keep up speed on them, and they want the latest and greatest, and which is, but it. And
I think what you're saying here is something that's been talked about from other guests we've had, is that people, especially when they get online, they're reading and just kind of getting overwhelmed, or really they just need to pick a setup and go out and start fishing.
Exactly.
And that's the bottom line, because that's the only way you're going to really learn to do it. And you mentioned earlier about guiding and teaching. So you're doing a little bit of guiding now out there?
Yeah, I do. I did, a fair bit this summer, actually, for a friend of mine. I have, a couple jet boats and that, and rafts, and so I was pretty much set up for that. And I didn't know how I'd like it, but I thought it was a lot of fun. We had people from all over the world, from Ireland, the UK, and from the United States, and Denmark, Sweden. And it was pretty exciting watching these guys catch steelhead and get so excited, about this fish, and knowing, I fished a lot of rivers, but a lot of times I'm not fishing them every day. But when I'm out on some of these systems that I was on, I was fishing them fairly regularly, and you got a pretty good idea where the fish were sitting. And you could always get that guy who maybe hadn't got a fish yet today near the end, and set him up and say, okay, if you do exactly what I tell you here, you are going to get a fish. And it's pretty cool knowing that, the fish are sitting there, and he swings through there, and boom, he gets one, and everything comes together. And so that was pretty exciting. It just, there are lots of them are so appreciative too of having the opportunity and fishing in some pretty amazing places. We fished a lot of remote stuff that the guy I worked for. We're not fishing a lot of the the stuff where there's other people in boats and that. We would spend a lot more time driving and boating and that to get the places where we wouldn't see other people. And I think they liked more of that too, the adventure of it. So we would tell them that we got a long drive today, but you're going to have an adventure, either in the jet boat, or you're going to go out and see grizzly bears when we're there, and whales and other stuff out in the ocean. And so I think that part of it, so I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun, and had pretty much all my experiences were pretty good.
Nice. And you mentioned earlier about nymphing. So I know the swinging game there is a big part of it, but do you guys do some tossing nymphs out there as well?
Yeah, I would say, egg patterns and that are, we didn't do a lot of it just because the fish are pretty aggressive, but I would say it's far more effective, especially later on, like in, November, December, the fish, some of them get a little more, maybe not quite as aggressive, but if you put a little indicator on your spay rod and chuck it out there and a little bead or egg pattern or something, it can be it can be pretty deadly. But to be honest, I was thinking about, someone asked me this year, and I said we had a couple clients try that, and just after we'd gone through the pool a couple times, and I said, well, if you want to try this, it's usually pretty effective. But I don't think we actually caught one fish on it this year.
Yeah.
But with that being said, when I'm out by myself, sometimes or friends, we'll go through with the swung fly or dry fly, and then, if we got more time there, the one guy will go through with a, egg pattern or bead or whatever at the end, and just see if there's anything else in there sometimes. So it can be, really effective. And then the guys out there using, their gear rods and that, with a float and that they really effective using that that system, just letting that float go down with a mile down the river, it seems. So, but yeah, I don't know. There's something about catching it on a swung fly too, and it makes it pretty exciting.
Yeah, that is kind of a big part of it. And you mentioned earlier about some coho and other species. Do you fish for what are all the species? Is that mainly what you target out there?
Yeah, I would say that, the beauty of this area as well is we have all 5 species of Pacific salmon and steelhead, and they're same thing. They're quite varied in their timing in that too. So you'll start getting some Chinook or king salmon, showing up in late April, early May. And then, you'll be catching coho right until November, December. They're not fresh ones by then, but there's some systems that still have fresh coho in November. So, and then you have, the big sockeye runs. We have pink runs they're pretty good size. You have chum runs here on some of the systems, and then coho starting in August and September, November, October. Yeah, they're a lot of fun on the fly. We fish some systems they're just so in tune to the fly, and then swinging them too with usually a little twitch or something. They love that little bit of twitch or strip, but even on the swung fly sometimes. And I don't get fussy, to be honest. I love steelhead fishing, but when I can be out in some of these systems just swinging, and you're letting everything go anyways, and that coho, nice 10-15 pound coho grabs your fly. It's pretty exciting. So and there are some amazing spots that the coho, same thing. Every little system out here seems to have coho as well. So they're pretty, easier to catch and pretty good numbers of coho and Chinook. We do a bit of that. They're pretty tough on the fly, but and you get one on the fly, even a 20 pounder, you're in for a good battle. You need a big 9-weight, 10-weight rod and heavy lines and that, and you're dredging bottom, for those most of the time. And but I wouldn't say that's my thing as much, just because it's, you can get them on the Skeena, but the water's usually a bit dirtier and that, and the Kitimat River has Chinook. But yeah, you can, like I said, the whole summer here is just full of fish. And me and my friends, we would come out every year, late July, early August, and we call it the Grand Slam. And usually within the first 3 days, one of us or all of us would catch every species of salmon and steelhead on the fly.
That's amazing.
Pretty special time of year. If someone just wants to kind of go for that Grand Slam, come out to Paris in the Skeena area in late July, early August, and you can get into everything.
Let's go and get some good, a little bit warmer weather as well.
Yeah. You can be out there in your T-shirt fishing on the gravel bars, and everything comes up the Skeena at that time of year, except they have chum, but they're pretty rare to catch chum on the Skeena on the fly. But Kitimat's just a drive, and it's loaded with chum, and between the two systems, you can get all 5 species of salmon and steelhead usually pretty easy, or with a bit of work. Yeah,
that's really cool. Awesome. Okay, Rob. Well, I think that's about all I have for you. You want to maybe let us know what's going on maybe the next 6 months? Are you going to be getting plenty of fishing in, or anything new coming up?
Yeah, I'm just same old things. Can't wait till March. Now that I'm living here in Terrace, it'll be a little bit easier access for me to get out to some of these systems, and got a few of them in the back of my mind that haven't fished yet. So I actually get pretty excited going on Google Earth and planning out logistics and that for some spring trips. So that'll be my March, April here. I can't wait to get out there and start targeting some of these small spring steelhead systems.
Perfect. Well, if we get back up there, I'll definitely hit you up, and maybe we can grab a beer on the river. That would be awesome.
Yeah. If you definitely come up here, I'll take you out somewhere too, and we can go for a fish.
Cool. Sounds good. So where can people find you if they want to get in touch or if they have questions?
Probably my Instagram account would be the easiest. The Fishin'.nbsp, so FISHNBC.
Okay.
At Instagram. I mean, email. I have one, gloomis1@telus.net.
Okay.
So another email account. If people want to send me an email, got any questions or whatever, I can definitely or hopefully try and help them out.
Perfect. All right. Well, hey, Rob, really appreciate you coming on here. You provided a bunch of tips. I know I learned a lot here, so I wanted to thank you again for coming on and talking and providing all the information.
Okay. Well, good luck with the podcast.
Okay. Thanks. We'll see you.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
So there you go. If you want to find Rob, go to Instagram and just search for Fishin'.nbsp. That's FISHNBC. And if you want to find all the show notes for this episode, just go to wetflyswing.com and search for episode 10. If you can also go to Google and search for Rob Bryce, episode 10, and that should pop up. Thanks again for stopping by to check out the show. If you have a chance and you're on iTunes, it'd be really helpful if you can leave a review for this show. This helps other people that are trying to learn how to steelhead fish and get into their first fish, find the episode, and maybe help them along. So I wanted to say thanks for that, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon and hopefully seeing you on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.